morning. My name is Peter Palchis. I'm a member of the worship committee of this Unitarian Universalist Society of Martha's Vineyard. And this is the historic and beautiful Stevens Chapel. At this point in the service, we often have a sort of a boilerplate statement of how welcoming we are, including the word intentionally welcome. But today we have an opportunity to make this a little bit more real, because in talking with Jim in the past couple of weeks in preparation for this service, he told me a story about the first day that he walked into this space. And he was aware, not a lot gets by Jim Thomas, that on Sunday morning, churches are among the most segregated places in America. Sunday afternoons too. And there was a concert scheduled here to dedicate the organ, which had been refurbished. This is an old Hook and Hastings organ. And all the organists of Martha's Vineyard were going to come to play on it, and Jim wanted to hear it. And he said when he walked up the steps, he was a little bit concerned, because sometimes a person that big and that black walking into an all-white situation, a few people's hackles get raised and the tensions go up. But I want Jim to tell you himself the welcome he felt.
Good morning. When I first came into Stevens Chapel, there was a warmth that I felt, that you feel when you know that you are genuinely at home. And there was a song that I sang years and years and years ago, and it starts with "My shepherd will supply my need," and then at the end it says, "No longer like a guest, but like a child at home." And that's the way I felt. I felt welcomed and warm and cuddled. And I've returned ever since. And there is this sense of welcoming, regardless of the dialogue that we have and the back and forths that we have about issues. There is still this warmth that I feel. I feel welcome. My parents were sharecroppers. That meant that we went to the fields constantly to pick cotton, pick strawberries, cut cabbages, harvest other vegetables for the farm owner. And whether you knew this process of sharecropping, it was created in the South following the end of the Civil War. And on one side, the owner would determine whether or not you were able to get anything at the end of the year, or whether or not you still owed him. And magically, every year, we always owed. And so did all of these other black farmers that worked for these farm owners. Nobody ever either broke even or came out on top. Isn't that strange? But I picked cotton. I had this long bag on one side where you would, have any of you seen a cotton boll? And they have these little prickly things at the end. So your fingers have to avoid those and pull the cotton out, put them in the bag, and then hopefully the cotton is heavy enough. If you get it early in the morning, it's got a little dew on it. and it would be a little heavier so that you could get a few pounds. Maybe at the end of the day, you will have made $3 or $4. Sharecropping was interesting.
Yeah, but there was a kind of a good side. I mean, did you ever go hungry? Did you ever not have a place to sleep?
Never went hungry. Always food because we planted it. We would be, though, out in the fields. I would be there with my parents, and I would hear this roar up above, and I would say, "What is that?" "That's an airplane." And I would say, "You know, Mom and Dad, one of these days, I'm going to be on one of those, and somebody else will pay." And they said, "My child." And then I would be walking along one of those long strawberry patches, and there would be a county agent that would drive up with a county truck with a little label on the side. And I would say to my mom and dad, "You know, one of these days, I'll be able to drive a vehicle like that, and somebody else will pay." My folks would say, "Oh, he's really having a problem. We don't know what we're going to have to do with him, because he's not settling in like everybody else." And I wasn't. I could not be in that field for so long. And I knew it. Did not know how I was going to get out of it, but I was going to leave those fields.
So this was in Tennessee, right? And were there other family members? You mentioned something about a great grandmother and some going fishing with her.
Yes, my great grandmother, whom I knew, and she was well over 100 when she died, but was born a slave. And we think in the 1840s. She was a grand lady. She had real dark, glossy skin, almost no wrinkles. I would love sitting at her feet while she would tell me stories about the old days. And the old days were the slave days. That's when I first heard the stories about these songs. The songs that were created as communications devices during slavery. She told me about them while I was seated at her feet, and we would fish these long summery afternoons.
Now let's just switch for a minute to the topic of education. Did anyone in your family ever graduate high school?
Neither my mom nor my dad graduated from high school. They both graduated from, I think then they had graduations from the 6th grade and graduations from the 8th grade. And one graduated from the 6th and the other from the 8th. They were both from large families. My mom from a family of 9, and my father from a family of 10. And that's when they started saying, "There are just 2 of you, and you are going to go to college. There are just 2 of you, and you are going to go to college." Now, they were sharecroppers, but they did have the means to say that. I guess they didn't really want to work that hard either, but they didn't tell us.
So there was a school, and you had a music teacher. And she decided that not only would you graduate high school, but you would go to college. and arranged for an audition for you at a local college called Lane Christian College. And you prepared
Yes, the Biden Grenadier. And I went to this music symposium at Lane College with my music teacher, Francis DeGaulle Gibbons, and I sang it in German and in English and in French. Did not receive an honorable mention. Now, that was my first comeuppance with politics, big city politics. Have you ever heard of Nashville? Have you ever heard of Knoxville? Have you ever heard of Memphis? Have you ever heard of Humboldt? Humboldt is my hometown. Nobody had heard of Humboldt. Nobody. No recognition. Lane College, home of where Alex, are you familiar with Alex Haley? Yes. Alex Haley, who wrote Roots. Alex Haley's mother went to Lane College, and Alex Haley went to Lane College. I was expected to go there. My sister went to Lane College. Oh, my sister, who was so much more brilliant than me, went to Lane College. Now, what was I to do?
So this teacher had another option in mind, but it was 1956, about the time when people were doing sit-ins in Nashville. I believe there were some Freedom Riders. But she decided that she would take you and your mom and dad to Nashville in her car. I want to know what it was like to drive on the back roads and the main roads of Tennessee in 1956.
It was extremely painful because in those days there were few facilities available to black people as you traveled. And whether you were traveling or not, I mean, if you were on foot in your own town, it was painful to travel because there were no places where you could stop for any facilities. All said white only. White only. And if you got stopped in long traffic lines, your car was not going to go any place. And you would have to, quote, hold it.
So you got to Nashville, you went to Fisk University, and you went into a room where there was a man named John Wesley Work. Now, my question is, did he enhance or increase the understanding that your great-grandmother had begun when she went fishing with you and talked about the old songs?
As a matter of fact, yes. He asked me, first of all, Mr. Work sat in the corner, and it looked awesome to me on one side, and I sang for him. And he said, son, where are you from again? So I said, Humboldt. He said, oh, think it would be great to have you in my little group. But I'm taking them off to Europe now to tour. When I get back in the fall, I'd like for you to come sing with us. You go over to the administration building and tell Mary D. Shane to sign you up, and that we have no scholarships here, but she'll find you a job when you come in the fall. And when you come back, I want you here. I want you to sing with us.
So Jim, you told me this was a life-changing week for you. Tell me, why was it a life-changing week for you?
The Fisk Jubilee Singers novel, I mean, they had sung Fisk into permanence. I was awe-inspired by those people. And to get invited to sing with them for the next 4 years, when ordinarily one got to sing at least 3 years. I mean, you didn't sing 4 years because with the great John Work, you just didn't do it. Or any other director of the Jubilee Singers. You just did not. You just could not do it. You could not do it. And here he was asking me to sing with him for 4 years. As it turns out, then, when John Work returned from Europe, he came back ill. He did direct for another 3 years, and then the group was taken over by Matthew W. Kennedy. And I sang with him for an additional 3 years. So I sang a total of 5 years with the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Because the year after I graduated, I was in Nashville. And in Nashville, Matthew Kennedy invited me to come back and sing with them again. It was life-changing.
Jim, thank you very much for that. We're now going to hear a group which I thought was going to be a quartet, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a quintet or a sextet from your Slave Song Choir. But look at this as a preview, because 2 Sundays from now, the full choir with Jim leading will be back here for a concert right here in the beautiful, historic Stevens Chapel. After the quintet, or sextet, whatever it is, we're going to sing Amazing Grace and then have our social hour and refreshments out on the lawn. Oh, I left out something very important. After we sing, after the quintet, Jim is going to speak for a minute or two about Juneteenth.
tell you why a little later. Just these final things about Juneteenth. And I don't know why the story is never developed this way so that it's very clear for people. There is a need for a national holiday that celebrates the ending of slavery. But there were 3 Emancipation Proclamations. You never hear about it. Yes, 3, but there were 3. The very first Emancipation Proclamation was written in the summer of 1862, to free all the slaves in Washington, D.C. that were being held by senators and others down the street. Lincoln said, I cannot have slaves freed anywhere and then not have them have the slaves working down the street. And so he signed the very first one that would become effective January 1, 1863. The second one was to free all of the slaves in all of the states fighting against the Union. That should have included Texas. You get it? All of the states fighting against the Union only. So if you were in the Union and holding slaves, you could still keep them. But this was the one that should have freed all of the slaves in Texas. And it should have been effective also January 1, 1863. And then, of course, the third one was the one freeing all the slaves in all the states. Effective January 1, 1865. So there were really 3. Now, just on the matter of Juneteenth itself, when General Granger actually arrived in Galveston, Texas, and stood on that balcony and shouted out. Texas is rather large, you know. And there was no electricity and so forth in those days for them to be. And he shouted out, y'all are free. He did have a regiment with him. But it did take a little while to go across Texas. Everybody thought that it was June and maybe between the 13th and the 19th. Thus, teenth. There was no certainty that it was on the 19th, or certainty that it was on the 13th. But they thought perhaps it was between the 13th and the 19th. Thus, Juneteenth. Happy Father's Day. Happy Juneteenth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Our final hymn is printed at the bottom of the back page of the order of service, Amazing Grace.